They laughed before she even reached him. The sound cut through the grand ballroom like shattered glass, sharp and merciless. "So, will you be dancing with the cripple?" someone whispered loudly, never bothering to hide the cruelty behind the words. A ripple of laughter followed, careless and light, as if they were joking about the weather instead of a man's dignity. The chandeliers above glowed with golden warmth, but to Daniel, the light felt cold, almost mocking. Daniel sat at the edge of the ballroom, his wheelchair positioned neatly beside a marble pillar. His hands rested calmly on his lap, fingers interlocked, knuckles pale but steady. Years of living with whispered insults had taught him one painful lesson. Reactions only fed their amusement. He kept his gaze forward, eyes dark and thoughtful, as couples spun across the polished floor in elegant circles. Silk gowns brushed past, polished shoes tapped in perfect rhythm, and music filled the air with romance meant for everyone except him. He had not wanted to attend the winter charity ball. His sister, Emily, had insisted. "You can't keep hiding from the world," she had said gently, adjusting his tie earlier that evening. "You belong in places like this as much as anyone else." Daniel had smiled for her sake, but deep down, he knew how nights like this usually ended. With pitying looks, with whispers, with laughter that stung worse than silence. Across the room, Clara stood frozen, her hand resting on the arm of a woman she barely knew. The laughter reached her ears, and her cheeks burned with anger. She followed the sound until her eyes landed on Daniel. She noticed the way people leaned toward one another, mouths curved in cruel amusement, eyes sharp with judgment. She saw him too, not as they did, but as a man sitting alone in a room full of people. Clara had arrived late, hoping to avoid attention. She disliked crowded social events, especially ones filled with unspoken rules and quiet cruelty masked as elegance. She had agreed to come only because her aunt believed it was time for her to start meeting suitable men. Clara hated that word, suitable, as if people were items to be evaluated, selected, and approved. She took a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. Without fully realizing it, her feet began moving. Each step carried her closer to Daniel, closer to the whispers growing louder with every inch she crossed. People noticed. Conversations paused. Fans stopped fluttering. A few brows lifted in surprise as Clara, in her pale blue gown, walked directly toward the man everyone had just mocked. Daniel sensed the shift in the room before he saw her. The laughter faded into murmurs, and the music seemed to grow quieter. He looked up, expecting another sympathetic smile or awkward apology from a stranger. Instead, he saw Clara. She stopped in front of him, her eyes level with his, calm and unwavering. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening," she said softly, her voice steady. "My name is Clara." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Daniel," he replied, clearing his throat. "Good evening." She smiled, not the forced kind he was used to, but a genuine one that reached her eyes. Then, without glancing back at the crowd, she extended her hand. "Would you like to dance with me?" The silence was deafening. Daniel's heart skipped, then raced. He looked at her hand, then back at her face, searching for mockery, for hesitation, for pity. He found none, only sincerity. Still, years of humiliation rose up like a wall inside him. I don't dance," he said quietly. Clara tilted her head slightly. "That's all right," she replied. "Neither do I, very well. But we can try." A few people gasped. Others whispered furiously. Daniel felt the heat of their stares burning into his skin. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You don't owe me anything." Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it because I want to." Something inside Daniel cracked open. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hand in hers. Her grip was warm and firm, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. With graceful confidence, Clara guided his wheelchair toward the center of the ballroom. The musicians faltered for half a second, then resumed, the melody softer now, more intimate. Clara positioned herself beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the other still holding his. They didn't dance in the traditional sense. They moved together, gently swaying to the music. Clara followed his rhythm, matching his pace, turning what others might have seen as limitation into something beautifully different. Daniel felt something unfamiliar spreading through his chest. Not shame, not fear, but something dangerously close to hope. As they moved, Daniel became aware of how quiet the room had grown. The laughter was gone. In its place was an uneasy silence, broken only by the music and the soft rustle of fabric. People watched, unsure of what to think, their cruelty exposed under the glow of the chandeliers. Clara leaned down slightly. "They can stare all they want," she whispered. "Tonight isn't about them." Daniel swallowed hard. "You're brave," he said. She smiled again. "No," she replied. "I'm just tired of pretending." For the first time that evening, Daniel allowed himself to smile too. Not the polite, practiced smile he wore like armor, but a real one. In that moment, surrounded by judgment and whispers, something unexpected began to take shape, something neither of them could yet name, but both could feel. And as the music played on, Daniel realized that this night, which had begun with laughter meant to wound, might just become the night that changed everything. The music ended softly, like a sigh, yet no one moved. For a few long seconds, the ballroom remained frozen, as if everyone feared that any sudden sound might shatter what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause began, not loud at first, hesitant and scattered. A few polite claps turned into more, until the sound filled the room. Some clapped out of respect, others out of confusion, and a few simply because they did not know what else to do. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Applause was unfamiliar territory. Pity he knew. Mockery he understood. But this was something different. He glanced up at Clara, uncertain. She met his eyes and gave a small nod, as if to say, "It's all right. Breathe." As the clapping faded, conversations resumed in hushed tones. Eyes still followed them as Clara gently guided Daniel back toward the edge of the ballroom. Each step away from the center felt heavier than the walk toward it. Daniel's mind raced with thoughts he could not yet untangle. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice low. "For that." Clara stopped beside the marble pillar where he had been sitting before. "You're welcome," she replied. "But you don't need to thank me." Daniel let out a small, humorless laugh. People don't usually cross a room full of judgment just because they feel like it. Clara studied him for a moment, really studied him, as if she were reading a story written beneath his calm exterior. "People rarely do what feels right," she said. "They do what feels safe." Before Daniel could respond, a woman approached them. She was elegant, dressed in deep emerald silk, her posture sharp with confidence. Daniel recognized her immediately. Margaret Whitmore, a regular at events like these. The kind of woman who ruled social gatherings with raised eyebrows and carefully chosen words. "My dear," Margaret said to Clara with a thin smile, ignoring Daniel completely. "May I have a word with you?" Clara did not release Daniel's hand. "If it concerns me, you can say it here." Margaret's smile tightened. "I was simply going to remind you that this is a charity event. Appearances matter." Daniel felt the familiar sting of being reduced to an appearance, an inconvenience. He began to withdraw his hand, but Clara's grip tightened instead. "Appearances do matter," Clara said calmly. "That's why I'm glad everyone just saw the truth." Margaret's eyes flicked to Daniel for the first time, assessing, dismissive. "Truth is often uncomfortable," she replied. "So is cruelty," Clara said, her voice still polite, still controlled but firm. Yet that never seems to stop anyone. A few nearby guests fell silent, listening. Margaret's cheeks flushed. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," Clara interrupted. "And I disagree." Margaret gave a stiff nod, murmured something under her breath, and walked away. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes, I did," Clara said simply. "And I would do it again." Daniel looked away, emotion threatening to rise too quickly, too strongly. "You don't even know me." Clara stepped closer. "Then let me." They sat together near the edge of the room, the noise of the ball fading into the background. For the first time that evening, Daniel felt like the world wasn't rushing past him. Clara asked about his life, not with careful, rehearsed sympathy, but with genuine curiosity. He told her about the accident, a carriage collision years ago, how one careless moment had reshaped his entire future. He spoke of hospitals, of endless therapy, of learning patience in ways he never imagined. He spoke of friends who slowly disappeared and invitations that stopped arriving. Clara listened without interrupting. Her eyes never wandered. When he finished, she didn't rush to fill the silence. I used to think, Daniel continued quietly, that if I stayed invisible, the pain would hurt less. But sometimes being unseen hurts more. Clara nodded. People fear what reminds them of their own fragility, she said. You remind them that life can change. Daniel studied her face. And you? He asked. What do people fear about you? Clara smiled sadly. That I won't behave as expected. They shared a small laugh, a fragile bridge forming between them. Across the room, Daniel noticed his sister Emily watching them. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a smile trembling on her lips. When their eyes met, she pressed a hand to her heart. Later that evening, as guests began to leave, Clara stood. I should go, she said reluctantly. Daniel felt a sharp pang of disappointment. Of course. She hesitated, then reached into her small clutch and pulled out a card. If you'd like to talk again, she said, placing it gently on his lap. I would like that. Daniel picked it up as if it were something fragile. I would, he said. Very much. As Clara walked away, Daniel watched her disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, he didn't feel smaller in a room full of people. He felt possible. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered a thought he had never dared to believe before. This is not the end of your story. The ballroom emptied slowly, its earlier cruelty lingering like a ghost in the corners. Candles burned low, and the music faded into distant echoes as servants moved quietly, clearing glasses and smoothing tablecloths. Daniel remained seated near the marble pillar, Clara's card still resting in his hand. He traced the edges with his thumb, as if grounding himself in the reality of the moment. Her name, her handwriting, proof that the night had not been a dream. Emily approached him, her eyes shining. I saw everything, she said softly. Daniel looked up at his sister. I didn't plan any of it, he replied. I know, Emily said, crouching beside him. That's what made it beautiful. Daniel swallowed. Do you think people will talk? Emily smiled gently. They always do. Let them. As they prepared to leave, Daniel took one last look at the ballroom. Earlier, it had felt like a battlefield. Now, it felt like a place where something important had begun. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Daniel's townhouse, casting pale gold patterns across the floor. The city outside hummed with life, unaware of the quiet transformation unfolding inside him. Daniel sat at his desk, Clara's card placed carefully beside a stack of unread letters. He had never been good at first moves. Before the accident, confidence had come easily. After, every step felt like a risk. He stared at the card for a long time before finally picking it up. Her address was written neatly beneath her name. With a deep breath, Daniel rang for the servant. Bring me pen and paper, he said. The letter took longer than he expected. He wrote, erased, rewrote. He wanted to sound grateful without sounding weak, honest without being heavy. When he finally sealed the envelope, his hands were trembling. He sent it that afternoon. Days passed. Daniel tried not to think about it. He returned to his routine, morning exercises, afternoons reading by the window, evenings spent sketching. Art had become his refuge since the accident, a place where his body's limits did not exist. Yet his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara, to her steady gaze, to the way she had held his hand without hesitation. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. Daniel recognized the handwriting instantly. His heart pounded as he broke the seal. She wrote with warmth and humor, teasing him gently about his formal tone. She thanked him for trusting her with his story and confessed that the ball had been the first time in a long while she felt truly seen. She invited him to join her for tea in her garden the following Sunday. Daniel read the letter twice, then a third time. Sunday arrived wrapped in soft spring air. Daniel dressed carefully, choosing a simple suit. As his carriage stopped before Clara's home, nerves twisted in his stomach. The garden was alive with color. Roses climbed trellises, and birds sang from hidden branches. Clara waited near a stone bench, sunlight catching in her hair. "You came," she said, smiling. "Almost convinced myself not to," Daniel admitted. She laughed. "I'm glad you didn't." They spoke for hours. About books, about music, about childhood memories and quiet regrets. There was no audience this time. No whispers. Just two people discovering each other slowly, honestly. At one point, Daniel fell silent, watching her hands move as she spoke. "What is it?" Clara asked. "I keep expecting you to realize this is a mistake," he said quietly. Clara reached out, resting her hand over his. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. In that moment, Daniel understood something important. Love, if that was what this was becoming, was not about rescue or bravery. It was about choice, and Clara was choosing him. As the afternoon faded into evening, Daniel felt a calm he had not known in years. For the first time since the accident, the future did not feel like a closed door. It felt like a path, uncertain, yes, but open, and he was ready to follow it. The days following their meeting in the garden unfolded with a gentle rhythm Daniel had almost forgotten existed. Letters were exchanged regularly, each one less formal than the last. What began as careful politeness slowly transformed into warmth, humor, and a growing sense of ease. Clara wrote about small things. The way her aunt scolded her for muddy shoes, the stray cat that had claimed her garden, the books she read late into the night. Daniel replied with sketches tucked into envelopes, drawings of city streets, of flowers he imagined growing in her garden, of moments he could not yet say out loud. Their worlds, once distant, began to overlap. One afternoon, Clara visited Daniel's townhouse. Emily welcomed her with open delight, insisting on tea and far too many pastries. Daniel watched the two women talk, surprised by how naturally Clara fit into his life, as if she had always belonged there. "You make him lighter," Emily said later with a knowing smile. Clara glanced at Daniel, her expression soft. "He was already strong," she replied. As weeks passed, their relationship did not go unnoticed. Society, which had once laughed so easily, now whispered with curiosity. Some spoke with approval, others with skepticism. Invitations arrived again, some sincere, others clearly motivated by spectacle. Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to be paraded," he admitted one evening. "Then we won't go," Clara said without hesitation. "But hiding feels like losing," he replied. Clara considered this. "Then we go on our terms." Their first public appearance together was at a small concert hall. No grand ballroom, no chandeliers, just music and close seats. Still, eyes followed them. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Clara leaned close. "Look at me," she whispered. He did. The orchestra began, and for the first time, the noise of the world faded. When the performance ended, applause filled the hall. This time, Daniel did not wonder if it was meant for him or despite him. He simply enjoyed the sound. Outside, a young boy approached them hesitantly. "Sir," he said to Daniel, "my brother uses a chair too. He says he doesn't belong anywhere." Daniel's heart clenched. He bent slightly forward. "Your brother belongs everywhere," he said gently. "Never let anyone tell him otherwise." The boy smiled and ran back to his family. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think we can change anything?" he asked Clara, who sat beside him, reading. "We already are," she said quietly. Not all moments were easy. There were stares that lingered too long, comments disguised as concern. One evening, a former friend remarked, "You're very fortunate she's so understanding." Daniel's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Clara answered calmly, "I'm fortunate he's exactly who he is." After the guest left, Daniel felt the weight of unspoken fear surface. One day, he said softly, "You might grow tired of defending me." Clara closed her book and turned to him fully. "I'm not defending you," she said. "I'm defending us." Her words settled deep inside him. As spring turned into summer, Daniel found himself venturing out more, not because he felt pressured, but because he wanted to. They attended galleries, quiet dinners, long walks where Clara pushed his chair without a second thought, matching his pace, never rushing. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Daniel stopped near the river. I used to think my life ended the day of the accident, he said. Everything after felt like waiting. Clara rested her hand on his shoulder. And now, he said, meeting her eyes, it feels like it's beginning again. She smiled, and in that smile, Daniel saw not pity, not bravery, but partnership. And for the first time, the laughter that once haunted him had lost its power. Summer settled gently over the city, and with it came a quiet confidence Daniel barely recognized as his own. Mornings no longer felt heavy. The ache in his chest, the one born from years of being unseen, began to loosen its grip. Clara's presence had not erased the past, but it had softened it, giving Daniel room to breathe again. They spent long afternoons together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing side by side. Clara would read aloud while Daniel sketched, the sound of her voice blending with the scratch of pencil on paper. Silence between them never felt awkward. It felt earned. One afternoon, Daniel showed her a locked drawer in his desk. I haven't opened this in years, he said. Inside were old drawings from before the accident, bold lines, ambitious compositions, unfinished dreams. Daniel's hand hovered over them. I stopped believing in these versions of myself, he admitted. Clara picked up one of the sketches carefully. They're still yours, she said. You don't lose parts of yourself just because life changes. Her words stirred something restless within him. Later that week, Daniel received an unexpected invitation. A small gallery had seen his recent work, sketches he had shared quietly, anonymously, and wanted to feature him in a group exhibition. Daniel read the letter twice, then folded it away. I don't think I can, he said that evening. Why? Clara asked gently. Because once I step into that room, he said, they won't just see the art. They'll see me. Clara nodded, understanding the fear beneath his words. Then let them, she said. Let them see both. The night of the exhibition arrived. The gallery buzzed with low conversation and soft music. Daniel's work hung modestly on the far wall. Cityscapes, figures caught between motion and stillness, moments of quiet resilience. As people gathered around his pieces, Daniel listened from a distance. He heard admiration, questions, genuine curiosity. No laughter, no whispers. A man approached him. Your work feels honest, he said, like someone who's learned how to see the world differently. Daniel smiled, a real one. Thank you. Clara squeezed his hand. See, she whispered. Not everyone was kind. A woman murmured to her companion. It's inspiring, considering his condition. Daniel felt the familiar, tightening return. But this time, it did not consume him. Clara turned calmly. It's inspiring because it's human, she said. The woman fell silent. Later that night, as they sat together beneath a sky scattered with stars, Daniel spoke the fear he had been carrying quietly. What if one day you wake up and realize this life is harder because of me? Clara did not answer immediately. She looked at him steadily. Life is hard regardless, she said. I choose who I face it with. Daniel felt emotion rise, sharp and overwhelming. I don't want to be your burden. You're not, she replied. You're my partner. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's work gained attention. More invitations came. More doors opened. Each step forward felt surreal, but grounded by Clara's unwavering presence. One evening, Daniel wheeled himself onto the balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. I used to think love meant being rescued, Daniel said quietly. But now I think it means being seen and staying. Clara smiled. Then stay with me. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by fear. And in that moment, Daniel realized that healing did not come all at once. It came in small, brave choices made daily together. Autumn arrived quietly, brushing the city with shades of amber and rust. Leaves gathered along the streets like memories, some easy to step over, others impossible to ignore. Daniel noticed the change not just outside his window, but within himself. The confidence he had begun to build no longer felt fragile. It was still new, still careful, but it was real. With recognition came attention, and with attention came pressure. One afternoon, Daniel received a letter bearing the seal of a prestigious cultural foundation. They invited him to speak at a public forum on art and resilience. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words. "They want me on a stage," he said to Clara that evening. "Not my work. Me." Clara read the letter, then looked up. "Do you want to do it?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "Part of me does. Part of me remembers every room that laughed." Clara considered this carefully. "You don't owe anyone your pain," she said. "But if you speak, do it because you want your voice heard, not because you feel like you have to prove something." Daniel nodded, her words settling slowly. That night, sleep came in fragments. Old memories surfaced, the accident, the long months of recovery, the way the world had narrowed. By morning, his decision was clear. "I'll do it," he said, "but I won't tell them the story they expect." The day of the forum, the hall was full. Daniel waited backstage, listening to the murmur of the crowd. Clara stood beside him, calm and steady. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I'm here." When Daniel wheeled onto the stage, the room fell quiet. Faces turned toward him, curious, assessing. He took a breath. "I was once told my life would always be defined by what I lost," he began. "But loss is only part of the story. What matters just as much is what we choose to build afterward." He spoke about art, not as therapy, not as inspiration, but as language, about how creativity allowed him to express what the world often refused to hear. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not offer tragedy. He spoke with honesty. When he finished, there was silence. Then applause, deep, sustained, unforced. Backstage, Daniel felt something release inside him. "I didn't feel small," he said, almost surprised. "You weren't," Clara replied. "Not all reactions were positive." A columnist wrote that Daniel's success was remarkable given his limitations. The words echoed familiar wounds. Daniel stared at the article longer than he should have. "That sentence still hurts," he admitted. Clara folded the paper. "Then let it," she said. "But don't let it decide who you are." Later that week, Daniel visited the rehabilitation center where he had spent months learning to live again. He had avoided the place for years. Now, he moved through its halls with a strange sense of peace. A young man sat by the window, his wheelchair new, his eyes distant. Daniel recognized the look immediately. "They tell me I'll adjust," the man said bitterly. "I don't believe them." Daniel rolled closer. "I didn't either," he said. "Adjustment isn't acceptance. It's learning how to fight differently." The man looked at him, uncertain but listening. As Daniel left the center, he felt something shift. His past no longer felt like a weight dragging him backward. It felt like a foundation. That evening, Clara noticed his quiet mood. "Where are you?" she asked gently. "I'm realizing," Daniel said, "that I don't just want to survive well. I want to matter to someone, to something." Clara took his hand. "You already do." The season continued to turn, and with it, Daniel's understanding of himself. Love had not erased the world's cruelty. It had given him the strength to face it without shrinking. And for the first time, Daniel understood that his story was no longer about overcoming. It was about becoming. Winter returned, quieter this time, as if the world itself had learned to move more gently around Daniel's life. Snow dusted the streets, softening sharp edges, and the city slowed beneath its white cover. Inside Daniel's home, warmth lingered, not just from the fire burning in the hearth, but from the certainty that he was no longer walking his path alone. The foundation invited Daniel again, this time not as a speaker, but as a mentor for young artists with disabilities. The idea unsettled him. Mentorship implied authority, wisdom, things he was not sure he possessed. "I'm still figuring things out myself," he told Clara. "That's exactly why you're right for it," she replied. "You're honest." The first session was small. 5 artists sat in a circle, each carrying stories heavy with doubt. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was not with answers, but with truth. You don't have to turn your pain into something beautiful for others, he said. Create because you need to, because it's how you stay alive. The room changed after that. Shoulders relaxed, eyes lifted. Daniel felt a quiet fulfillment settle inside him. At the same time, life tested them in subtler ways. Clara's aunt grew increasingly vocal about realistic futures. Friends asked questions disguised as concern. Invitations arrived addressed only to Clara. "Do you ever resent me?" Daniel asked one night, the question heavy and unguarded. Clara considered him for a long moment. "I resent a world that makes you ask that," she said. "Not you." Her honesty both comforted and challenged him. Love, he was learning, did not mean the absence of fear. It meant the courage to name it. One evening, snow fell heavily as they attended a small gathering. A man, well-meaning but careless, said, "You're lucky to have someone so devoted." Daniel stiffened. Before Clara could respond, he spoke. "We're lucky to have each other." The man flushed, nodding awkwardly. Later, Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For claiming us," she said. As the year drew toward its end, Daniel received news that one of his pieces had been acquired by a permanent collection. It was an honor he had never imagined. He sat in silence for a long time, absorbing the weight of it. "I wish my old self could see this," he said softly. Clara smiled. "He can. He's part of you." That night, as the fire crackled, Daniel felt a question forming, one he had been carrying for weeks. Fear whispered all the reasons to wait. Love whispered something stronger. He reached for Clara's hand. "I don't know what the future will demand of us," he said, "but I know who I want beside me when it does." Clara's breath caught, her eyes shining. Before she could answer, Daniel continued, "Not because I need saving, because I choose you." Tears welled in her eyes. "And I choose you," she said. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and steady, as if the world were bearing witness. And in that stillness, something shifted, subtle but profound. Their story was no longer just about two people finding each other. It was about building a life where neither had to be smaller to belong. The engagement did not arrive with spectacle. There were no grand announcements, no glittering headlines. Instead, it unfolded the way their love always had, quietly, deliberately, with meaning rooted deeper than display. Clara wore a simple ring, its design modest yet elegant, and when people noticed, they noticed because of the way she smiled when she looked at Daniel. Reactions came quickly. Some were joyful. Emily cried openly and hugged them both, laughing through tears. Others were careful, measured, filled with questions that sounded like concern but carried doubt beneath them. "Have you thought this through?" one acquaintance asked Clara gently. "Yes," Clara replied. Every day, Daniel heard the questions too, even when they were not addressed to him. "How will you manage? Will it be difficult? What sacrifices will be required?" Each word carried an assumption that love, in their case, was an act of charity rather than choice. One evening, after a particularly exhausting visit, Daniel sat quietly, staring out the window. "They never ask what I give you," he said. "Only what you give me." Clara sat beside him. "That's because they don't see partnership," she said. "They see imbalance." "And does it ever feel that way?" he asked, the question fragile and exposed. Clara did not answer immediately. She reached for his hand instead, intertwining their fingers. "Some days are harder," she said honestly. "But difficulty is an imbalance. It's life." Her honesty steadied him more than reassurance ever could. As wedding plans began, they made intentional choices. No grand ballroom, no performance. A small ceremony in Clara's garden, where everything had first felt possible. They wanted the day to reflect truth, not expectation. Daniel insisted on contributing in his own way. He designed the invitations himself, each one hand-illustrated. He worked late into the nights, perfecting details no one else might notice. When Clara found him exhausted but smiling, she understood. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly. "I know," Daniel replied. "I just want to build something with you." Winter loosened its grip as spring approached again. The garden bloomed early, as if eager to celebrate. Yet not everything was peaceful. Daniel began to feel the familiar ache in his body more frequently. Long days took their toll. One afternoon, frustration spilled over. "I hate that my body decides things for me," he snapped, then immediately looked away, ashamed. Clara did not flinch. "I know," she said, "but your body doesn't decide your worth." "That's not what I meant," he said quietly. "I don't want you to carry more than you should." Clara placed her forehead against his. "We carry what we choose," she whispered, "and I choose this." The night before the wedding, Daniel could not sleep. Old fears crept in. The laughter, the whispers, the doubt that had once defined him. Clara found him awake, staring into the dark. "Talk to me," she said. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Not of you, of failing you." Clara smiled gently. "Then fail with me," she said. "We'll figure it out together." In that moment, Daniel realized something essential. Love was not the promise of perfection. It was the promise of presence. As dawn approached, light filtered into the room, soft and forgiving. Tomorrow, they would stand before those who mattered most and speak words that could not be undone. And for the first time in his life, Daniel was not afraid of forever. He was ready for it.